Hello, chemistry students. Today we're going to talk about chemical and physical properties. Chemical properties describe the ability of a substance to undergo change that transform it into different substances. So some sort of chemical reaction has to occur in order to see a chemical property. For example, flammability. To see if something is flammable, you have to catch it on fire. And once you catch it on fire, a chemical change happens. To see if it will rust, the ability to rust, well, you have to oxidize it. You have to see if it will rust, and once it does rust, then it has a chemical change. And exploding. You can't see if something explodes without exploding it first, and then once you've exploded it, it is changed into something new. So these are all examples of chemical properties. Physical properties describe the substance, and they can be observed without a chemical reaction. So once you see this physical property or observe it, it doesn't change it. So like boiling point, the boiling point of water, once you find out what it is, you begin to boil it, the substance is still water. It hasn't changed into something new. The color, if you want to see what the color of gold is, you can look at it, and after you've determined that it is the color gold, or a yellowy substance, it's still gold. It hasn't changed into something new. And density, the same thing. The density of water we all know is 1.0. Once you measure that water and take the mass and the volume and take the mass divided by volume, you guys know the water is still water after you do that. So that is a physical property. Now, our physical properties can be classified into two categories, extensive or intensive. Extensive physical properties depend on the amount present. They vary or change with the amount of substance present and cannot be used to uniquely identify a substance. We're going to go through this in just a minute, an example. Intensive properties do not depend on the amount of matter present. So you can have a drop of it, or you can have 40 gallons and it will still stay the same. Doesn't matter how much you have. And they're frequently used to uniquely identify a substance. Malleability, that is the ability to put in a thin sheet and bend. Once you see if something's malleable, does that change it into something new? No, it doesn't, so it's not chemical. Now we have to ask ourselves, it is a physical property, now we have to ask ourselves, does it matter how much there is, depending on if it's malleable or not? If there's a small amount, it's malleable, and if there's a large amount, it isn't malleable. That's not how it works. So it doesn't matter how much there is, it will be malleable no matter how much if it is malleable. So it's intensive. Melting point. The melting point of water from ice to liquid is 0 degrees C. Whether you have a drop of it or whether you have 40 gallons. So it is an intensive physical property. The ability to react with acid. Well, in order to see if it reacts with acid, once it does react with acid, it'll turn into something new, so that is a chemical property. The ability to react with a base. Once it reacts with a base, it will turn into something new. So that's a chemical property, because it would change into something new. The ability to react with water. Same thing, reactions. If it reacts, that means you're changing it into something new. So that would be a chemical property. Ability to rust. We already know that rust is the oxidation of a chemical, or changing it, or reacting it with oxygen. So that would be chemical. The ability to tarnish. Same thing, in order to tarnish something, it has to change into something new. Chemical. Viscosity is how quickly something flows. Now, whether you have 10 milliliters of water or 40 gallons of water, its viscosity will be the same. It will flow very easily. 10 milliliters of syrup or 40 gallons of syrup, it's going to flow very slowly. It doesn't matter how much you have, so it's an intensive property. Boiling point, same thing like melting point. That would be intensive. Ability to conduct electricity. So we know copper conducts electricity, whether we have a small thin wire or we have a huge cable up on the power lines. So it doesn't matter how much you have of that, it will be able to conduct electricity. So it's intensive. Dissolves in water. This is just the ability to dissolve in water, not how much. So whether you have a grain of sugar or a crystal of sugar, or whether you have 4 cups of sugar, you're able to dissolve it in water. It is able to dissolve. So it doesn't matter how much there is. Ductility is the ability to draw into a wire. It's usually described with metals. Metals are usually ductile because you can pull them into wires. And whether you have 40 grams or 4,000 kilograms, it will still be ductile. And it doesn't matter how much there is. So it's intensive. Combust. In order to see if something will combust, you would have to light it on fire or blow it up, and then it would be changed into something new. So it is a chemical property. Flammability, same thing. To see if something will catch on fire or not, you'd have to catch it on fire, and then it would change into something new. So that's a chemical property. Mass is a physical property because in order to measure the mass of something, it does not change afterwards to a new substance, but the mass changes depending on how much you have. So if you have 4 milliliters or 40 gallons, the mass will change. So that is an extensive property, an extensive physical property. Odor is intensive. Whether you have a cup or a couple of gallons of perfume, it is still going to smell. Volume. Volume changes depending on how much you have. So that is an extensive physical property. Clarity, or how clear something is. Let's talk about water. Whether you have a cup of water or 40 gallons of water, it should be clear if it's just water. So it does not matter how much you have. So it's intensive. Color. Let's talk about gold. The color of gold is gold, and whether you have a coin size or whether you have a big block, it's still going to be the same color. So it doesn't matter how much there is, so it would be intensive. Consistency of something, how something feels, how thick it is. It doesn't matter how much there is, it is an intensive property. Density, we already talked about this. It doesn't change depending on how much you have. Whether you have a pea-sized piece of gold or a big block of gold, it's still going to be the same density. It will still sink in water. Length, that does change depending on how much you have. So it is an extensive physical property. Area also changes depending on how much you have. So it is an extensive physical property. Luster, or how much something shines. It doesn't matter if you have a little bit or a lot. The luster will not change. Hardness, or how hard something is, will not change depending on how much you have. So that also is an intensive physical property. And that's it. Thanks for watching, guys.